Can you hear me okay? Yeah, cool. At 16, I was a self-proclaimed feminist who believed what mainstream feminists and politicians like Claire Short were saying, that porn degraded women. However, one day I was walking down Old Compton Street in London's red light district, and I realised that my anger was actually envy. I was envious of men having their sexuality catered for in so many different ways, from prostitution magazines to films. In the late 1980s, women's sexuality was not catered for at all. I knew then that it was far more productive and feminist to invest my time in creating something that allowed women to explore their sexuality than it was to thwart men's freedoms. Sexual objectification, that is, fleetingly seeing somebody for their sexually attractiveness alone, is something women do just as easily as men. It just isn't seen as socially acceptable for women. I now work as part of a burgeoning feminist and queer porn industry, which is changing perceptions of sex on film. During my first degree, I read Jacques Lacan, whose work tells us that whatever gives you pleasure gives you power. This throws the traditional model of vertical power into question. Therefore, whatever interests you sexually is what you should practice, law willing. So if you're sexually submissive, you are disempowered if you do not admit this to yourself, as you deny yourself access to pleasure. To understand pornography, it is important to understand this point. Pornography is not the acting out of politics. Pornography is the acting out of the imagination and role play, which is only in part influenced by the wider gender arena. It is more useful to liken porn to a game or a sport than it is to everyday life. Porn stars and directors get power from expanding their limitations of their imaginations and bodily experiences. Anti-porn feminists mistake extreme sex with the lack of consent. That is, they compare sex with the rest of social life. Imagine for a moment a thought experiment. In 1980, a prominent theorist on the subject of violence links professional boxing to street and domestic violence. He argues that men are watching boxing on the television and are acting out what they see on the streets. After all, it follows that these men want to be seen as similar to their boxing idols. In response to this concern, it is easy to argue that televised professional boxing adheres to certain legal and cultural rules which render it different from everyday violence. We watch boxing as violence in quotation marks. It's a sport, not real life. People still know it is wrong to physically attack someone in reality, even though they enjoy it as entertainment. Unfortunately for pornography, such a theorist did exist. Andrea Dworkin wrote that pornography led to rape and the retardation of women's equality in the workplace and home, even though extensive research into pornography and its negative effects has only ever presented highly inconclusive findings. Ever since Dworkin, we have been almost neurolinguistically programmed to link porn with rape because it's such an emotive issue and therefore a difficult link to shake. Such theorists see women as inevitable victims, which in turn encourage women to see themselves as victims. It is this anti-porn feminism that gave men the power to taunt women with porn in offices and private lives as a tool which is mistakenly seen as shorthand for female disempowerment. This is not to say that there is no inequality in the porn industry. It is certainly the case that women are encouraged to play submissive roles in some films. But when people argue that the worst thing about porn is women are seen to be enjoying being raped or being abused, they effectively say that regardless of how much autonomy, education, or will of personality a woman has, she cannot consent to being in or consuming porn, or therefore to being anti-porn either. It's worth remembering at this point that independent research shows that 30% of all online porn is consumed by women. The anti-porn position is not based on expanding women's rights. It's a thinly veiled conservative and religious argument that firmly keeps women within the whore-Madonna dichotomy that most feminists and women have been fighting to escape for decades. Theirs is not a campaign to save women and children. Theirs is a fully fledged moral panic, as per Stanley Cohen's influential book, Folk Devils and Moral Panics. Using his theory, the porn producers have been chosen as a soft target for moral entrepreneurs, those who stand to gain the most from the panic, in order to project a whole host of society's ills onto one identifiable culprit that should be eliminated in order to magically deliver gender equality in this instance. We've been here before. In 1984, with the Video Recordings Act, when Mary Whitehouse stated that nearly 40% of all 6-year-olds watched video nasties. Journalists who found 6-year-olds admitting to seeing films that did not exist easily refuted this. But now children are seen as victims in porn, especially girls who are apparently helpless in the face of sexualization, with no libido of their own. But do the facts support this concern? Well, in a new book, Becoming Sexual, Dr. Danielle Egan refutes all the common arguments. For instance, in the United Kingdom, America, and Australia, it has been found that girls are waiting longer to lose their virginity than ever before. Pregnancy rates have dropped to the lowest rate in 30 years. Overwhelmingly, girls are experiencing their first sexual experience with a steady partner and are using contraception as condoms for the first time of intercourse. By far the most frequent sexual experience by young people is self-masturbation, not boys receiving oral sex as is often claimed. Sexual abuse and physical abuse of children has significantly declined. Adolescent crime rates have also dropped as part of a trend that shows a 49% drop in all violent crimes since 1995 in the UK. More girls are normal weight or overweight than underweight, and higher rates of women at age 18 as well as later in life are undertaking further and higher education than men. As readers of Foucault will know, we have been panicking about children and sexuality since the early 1800s, when boys' masturbation was a focus. Then in the 20th century, it was teenage pregnancy, now sexualization. But this debate is focused on why the porn industry is good for society. So allow me to give you a few good reasons. Porn keeps couples together. It's common for one member of a couple have a higher sex drive than the other, usually the man, and pornography is one way for such people to sate their desires without resorting to breaking up the relationship, having affairs, paying for sex, or pestering their partners for sex. Unlike most mainstream TV and film, pornography actually democratises the body. There is a market for literally anything, as it is 50% of the industry is amateur, showing all types of physiques, although this is not shown when the industry is represented through the mainstream media that constantly promotes the pneumatic blonde stereotype, even though a recent longitudinal study showed that the average female porn star is 23-year-old brunette with a B cup. I often say to women who don't like something about themselves, for instance, body hair or body size, stick it into a search engine and add the word porn next to it, and you will find a whole host of sites that think this is the most attractive thing about you. Porn democratises sex acts too, making sexual acts less shameful in society. Women used to be blamed for anything that was not entirely vanilla. Now it's more about personal taste. The pro- and anti-porn industries pays the wages of hundreds of thousands of taxpayers. Pornography continually develops and popularises new technology, which we all owe a debt for. Pornography is a good vehicle for learning about the human body in the absence of decent sexual education. It is where most men learn where the clitoris, A-spot and G-spots are. The porn industry is organised around the women who perform in the films as they decide their limits and are hired on that basis. It's the only industry I know where a woman's period is a good reason to change a shoot date to suit. Being a mother, or indeed being pregnant, simply means you sell to a new and different market. Compare this to the banking industry, where women have to ignore their female traits and bodies in order to get on. Due to porn's popularising of shaved pubic hair, which was always about relaxed censorship laws in the USA in the 1990s, due to the Clintons, interestingly, with both men and women shaving, not about the model's age, as has been argued. After all, a 20-year-old model with shaved pubes looks like a 20-year-old model with shaved pubes, not a 10-year-old. At least one health authority in the northeast of England has eliminated pubic lice in its entire population. Plus, we no longer need to suffer pubes at the back of the throat. We all have porn to thank for that. A final positive, I would argue, is from my own perspective. Porn has been a hugely positive and exciting industry to work in that has expanded my knowledge of sex and human interaction immensely. One day I will be filming a buxom, no-nonsense nurse with their unwitting male patients, and the next I'll be filming policemen and women in full gear going at it hammer and tongs. What can be wrong with that? My conclusion: it is important to be aware of moral panics, especially around the emotive subject of sexuality, which is always going to be exciting on some level. Please don't vote for an argument that says the world is going to hell in the handcart. It isn't. The world is just a complicated place in which civil liberties must be maintained and democracy respected. Thank you.